In this video, we're going to learn how to go backwards. So instead of starting with the equation and turning it into a graph, we're going to be starting with the graph and learning how to write the equation in slope-intercept form. So the thing to remember about slope-intercept form of an equation, or y equals mx plus b, is the two numbers in your equation tell you very important facts. That coefficient of x, or the m, stands for your slope, where the constant, or the b value, stands for your y-intercept. So if you know those two values, you're able to write your equation. Let's do two examples. Let's say my slope is 4 and my y-intercept is 3. That means my equation would be y equals, slope is your coefficient of x, so 4x, and your y-intercept is your constant. Since this is positive, we would write it as plus 3, and we're done. Same thing if you had a negative slope. So here we would have y equals a negative 3/5 as the coefficient of x. And if you don't have a y-intercept, or if it's 0, we could write plus 0, but that doesn't change anything. So you'd rather see it without 1 at all. So if your y-intercept is 0, you would just have your slope in x and no constant. If we're starting with a graph and not given the slope and y-intercept, we could easily find those from our graph to then turn it into our equation. So looking at slope, we've talked about kind of picking out 2 points to start. So I'm looking at where this graph kind of hits those nice corners, and I'm going to pick any 2 to find my slope. Remember, slope comes from the change in y over the change in x. So looking from point to point, I'm going down 2 and over 1. So my slope here would either be negative 2 over 1 or just negative 2. My y-intercept is where it crosses that y-axis right here. So my y-intercept would be this value of positive 4. Now that I have those, I'm ready for my equation. Y equals negative 2 for my slope x, and then plus 4 for the y-intercept. Let's quickly do a couple more. Looking at this graph, and I'm going to start by finding 2 points. So this one looks good. Really nothing until right here. So my slope is going to be up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for my change in y, and over 1, 2, 3, 4. So my slope is 5/4, and my y-intercept is down here at negative 4. So my equation would be y equals 5/4 x, and this time it's going to be minus 4 since it was negative. Now, maybe you're thinking, is there any benefit to changing this to its mixed number? You'll hear different people say different things. I actually prefer this way just because it gives you directly that change in y and change in x. So I prefer an improper fraction, but they're both mathematically equivalent. One more example for us. Let's look at this last one here. Again, start off with any 2 points. So maybe I'll use this one and this one. This time my slope is negative, so I'm dropping by 2 and going over 3. So I have a negative 2/3 slope, and my y-intercept is actually here at the origin, so it would be 0. That means my equation is going to look like y equals negative 2/3 times x, and I'm not going to have a constant since it would just be plus 0. So in summary, in order to write a linear equation, you need to know those 2 things. The slope, which becomes your coefficient of x, and your y-intercept, which becomes that constant at the end. So for something like a slope of 1/2 and a y-intercept of 0, my equation would be y equals 1/2 x. If I did have a y-intercept, what would change is I would still keep the slope as my coefficient, but then add or subtract that y-intercept at the end. If you're given a graph, find those 2 pieces of information first. So my slope here is slightly blurry, but it would be negative 1/3, and my y-intercept would be down here at negative 5. That would mean my equation for this line would be y equals negative 1/3 x minus 5 since it was negative. By comparison, on this second graph here, it looks like my slope is up 4 over 5, and my y-intercept is 0. So that means my equation would be y equals 4/5 x. Time for you to practice on this on your own. Good luck.